Welcome to the first paradox, the Ship of Theseus. Paradox. If you replace every part of a ship, is it still the same ship? What if you reassemble the old parts into another ship? A ship sets sail. Over time, its wood rots, so piece by piece, it's replaced. First a plank, then the mast, then the rudder, until eventually, not a single original part remains, yet it's still called the Ship of Theseus. Sailors board it, captains name it, ports recognize it. It seems the same ship, just with newer parts. But is it really the same? If nothing from the original remains, what is it we're calling the same? Now imagine someone else takes all those old, discarded parts, the original mast, the original planks, the original rudder, and puts them back together again. A perfect reconstruction, made entirely from what once was the Ship of Theseus. That ship, too, floats. It looks aged, but familiar. People look at it and say, that's the Ship of Theseus. That's what it looked like in the beginning. Now we have two ships, one made entirely of new parts, one made entirely of old ones. Which is the real Ship of Theseus? Let's break this apart without solving it. Because that's the power of a paradox. It's not here to give answers, but to unsettle the ground we walk on. At the heart of it is identity. What makes something what it is? Is it the material it's made from? Or is it something more abstract? Its function, its continuity, the story we attach to it. If we say the ship that sailed and was slowly replaced is the real Ship of Theseus, we're prioritizing continuity. We're saying what matters is the journey, the ongoing story. Even if every part changes, as long as it changes gradually, the identity remains. But then we run into trouble, because that would mean identity is not about what something is, but how it became. On the other hand, if we say the ship reconstructed from the original pieces is the true one, then we're saying identity lies in the physical components. That if you put the exact same parts together again, you get the original thing back. But then we have to admit, does a pile of planks lying unused become a ship simply because they were a ship once? Is identity something we can disassemble and reassemble like Lego? And here's the deeper twist. What if both ships are valid in their own way? What if identity isn't a single thing, but a layered phenomenon? The ship with new parts holds the functional identity. It's the one still sailing, still doing the job. The one with the old parts holds the historical identity. It reminds us of the past, of origins, of memory. Can both coexist? Or does the existence of two true ships destroy the very idea of something being original? This paradox doesn't stop at ships. It's a stand-in for people. Your body replaces its cells over time. Skin cells shed, blood cells renew, neurons shift. After several years, almost none of the cells you started with are still with you. Are you still you? If someone had collected all your old cells and made a clone, which version is more you? The one walking around now, or the one built from your former physical self? And we can't escape it by appealing to the mind either. Your memories change. Your personality shifts. Your beliefs evolve. The person you were 5 years ago might seem like a stranger. So, where is the self in all of this? Is there a core that stays constant while everything else changes? Or is the self an illusion stitched together by memory and narrative? Even legal systems struggle with this. A company changes its staff, its products, even its name, but it holds on to the same business registration. Is it the same company? What if a competitor buys the old equipment and hires the same people? Who's the real company now? The paradox works because it refuses to give us a firm ground. It exposes our assumptions. We like to think of things as having a fixed identity. A ship is a ship. A person is a person. But reality isn't that neat. It forces us to see that identity is something we impose, something we construct, because it makes life simpler to navigate. Some try to escape the paradox by saying the ship of Theseus is neither the old parts nor the new parts, but the idea of the ship itself, that what matters is not the wood or the nails, but the concept. The ship is a pattern. As long as the pattern continues, same design, same purpose, it's the same ship. But then, what happens when we start changing the design, making upgrades, repainting the deck? How much change is too much before the pattern breaks? And here's a strange twist. What if the parts of the original ship are scattered? One plank in a museum, one mast used in a cottage, one rudder turned into a coffee table. None of them make a ship anymore. But together, they once did. Does their meaning survive separation? Or does identity dissolve the moment the whole is broken? This paradox pulls at every thread of certainty. It invites you to think about yourself, others, and the objects around you in ways that are unstable. Maybe identity isn't something fixed or found. Maybe it's something agreed upon, something we pretend is stable for convenience, but that really wobbles the moment we press against it. That's the haunting part of the Ship of Theseus. It's not just about ships, it's about everything, about memory, about ownership, about self. It whispers, what are you really if everything can be changed piece by piece until nothing is left of the original? So is it the same ship? The answer, paradoxically, might be both yes and no, or perhaps neither, and that's the uncomfortable, exhilarating power of the paradox. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the barber paradox. A barber shaves everyone who doesn't shave themselves. So who shaves the barber? Let's take the statement slowly. There is a barber in a village. He has one simple rule. He shaves all the men in the village who do not shave themselves, and he does not shave anyone who shaves themselves. Just that. No one is left out. Every man in the village either shaves himself or gets shaved by the barber, but not both. Now the question arises, who shaves the barber? If the barber doesn't shave himself, then by the rule, he must shave himself, because he shaves all those who don't shave themselves. But if he does shave himself, then he shouldn't be shaving himself, because he only shaves those who don't. That's the heart of the paradox. The rule folds in on itself. The barber is stuck. No matter what he does, he breaks the rule. If he shaves himself, he violates the rule. If he doesn't, he still violates the rule. He cannot exist under the condition he is supposed to follow. This isn't just a trick of words. It's a logical contradiction, a loop with no escape. The very condition that defines the barber also destroys the possibility of his role. He is both the shaver and the unshaved, and neither at the same time. It's not about grooming or razors or villages, it's about self-reference. Systems that refer to themselves can easily become unstable. They collapse into paradox the moment they loop back on their own rules. The barber's rule is not broken by something outside. It's broken by itself. Suppose we try to remove the barber from the rule. Maybe say, he's not part of the village. But then, who enforces the rule? And why would the rule apply to everyone except him? And if he's outside the rule, what makes him the barber at all? He's no longer part of the system he was meant to maintain. Or say, we rewrite the rule. The barber shaves everyone who does not shave themselves except himself. But now the rule is patched. It's no longer clean. It's no longer paradoxical. We've changed the game instead of solving the puzzle. That's important. Some problems invite solutions. Paradoxes invite realization. The realization that some rules cannot be complete without tearing themselves apart. This paradox, like others, reveals cracks in the structure of logic. It feels like a riddle, but it's more like a mirror. It reflects the limitations of systems that try to contain themselves. The barber's job is to control who gets shaved based on a simple yes or no. But his own status breaks that clarity. the system cannot define him without collapsing. And the deeper truth here is that not all questions have valid answers. Some are flawed at the root. The question, who shaves the barber, assumes the barber must be part of the very system he governs. But maybe he can't be. Maybe some roles can't be fulfilled if they also apply to themselves. This paradox echoes across logic and philosophy. It's not alone. It shares DNA with the liar's paradox. This sentence is false. If the sentence is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. It spins endlessly. Just like the barber, it traps itself in a loop it can't escape. Both paradoxes are self-referential. They twist inward, and when a system talks about itself too directly, it risks inconsistency. Logic, we like to believe, is clean. But these paradoxes show that even logic can become tangled if it tries to fold back into itself. In mathematics, this becomes dangerous. Bertrand Russell, the philosopher who created the barber paradox, did so to illustrate a serious problem in set theory. Some sets are defined by what they do not contain. For example, consider the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does that set contain itself? If it does, it shouldn't. If it doesn't, it should. Sound familiar? Russell used the barber to show that even simple rules, if self-referencing, can become contradictory. The paradox isn't an error, it's a warning, a demonstration that systems must be carefully constructed to avoid these collapses. We think in categories. We want clear answers. The barber paradox exposes how fragile those answers can be. It shows that even a clean, logical rule can crumble when turned inward. It reveals that sometimes a question can't be answered not because the answer is unknown, but because the question itself doesn't hold. Try to draw the barber's logic as a diagram. Each person is a node. If someone shaves themselves, they're excluded. If someone doesn't, they connect to the barber. But when you draw the barber, you can't decide where to place him. His arrow turns back on itself. He's a loop, and logic doesn't like loops that close without resolution. You can't fix the paradox without changing its structure. That's why it stays a paradox. It doesn't go away. It points to a boundary, a place where definitions fail. And here's the unsettling thing. We create systems like this all the time. In law, in language, in ethics. We build rules and expect them to cover every case, including the ones that define the rules themselves. But the barber paradox reminds us that sometimes the rule maker can't be ruled. What makes this paradox beautiful is how simple it is. One sentence, one idea, and yet it tears a hole in logic big enough to fall through. It invites us to think deeper about what we mean by rules, identity, and structure. It's not a trick. It's a truth, a small, elegant doorway into the limits of reason. The barber can't shave himself without breaking the rule, but he also can't not shave himself without breaking the rule. So he stands there, razor in hand, locked in a loop forever. That is the paradox. Not a puzzle to solve, but a mirror to stare into. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the grandfather paradox. If you travel back in time and kill your grandfather before your parent is born, how could you have existed to go back in time? You step into a time machine. You travel back to a time before your parent was born. You find your grandfather, and for some reason, maybe curiosity, maybe chaos, you kill him. Instantly the logic splits, because now, if your grandfather dies before having children, your parent is never born. If your parent is never born, you are never born. And if you are never born, then who just went back in time and killed your grandfather? That's the loop. That's the knot. That's the paradox. A closed circle with no stable answer. Your action in the past erases the condition that made your action possible. Your presence becomes the very thing that undoes your existence. You cause your own non-existence by existing. But then, if you're not born, then you don't travel back in time. And if you don't travel back in time, then your grandfather lives. And if he lives, then your parent is born, and so are you, which means you do go back in time. And then, once again, you kill your grandfather, and the loop starts again. It spins endlessly with no resolution. This is not a mistake in storytelling. It's a breakdown in causality. Time, as we understand it, moves forward. Cause leads to effect. One step follows the next. But time travel, especially into the past, twists that line into a circle. It allows effects to rewrite their own causes. And that's where paradox begins. What makes this one so powerful is how personal it is. It's not a logic game with abstract rules. It's about your family, your bloodline, your very existence. The paradox takes the simple idea of action and consequence and flips it inward. You become both the result and the interruption of a single event. Some try to escape the paradox by saying that the moment you travel back and kill your grandfather, you create a new timeline, a parallel reality. In that new reality, you don't exist, but the original you, who came from a different timeline, still does. So the killing doesn't stop you from traveling back, because your version came from another branch. But that's not a solution. That's a redirection. It avoids the contradiction by splitting the timeline. And while that might work in fiction, it breaks the paradox. It moves us into a multiverse rather than a loop. And this paradox lives in the loop. Others try to say that time resists paradox, that something would always go wrong. Your gun jams, you miss your target, a tree falls and distracts you. The universe corrects itself. But then we're saying reality has a kind of self-defense system, an invisible hand that prevents contradictions, which leads to another question. Is time aware of itself? Is it a force that can refuse certain outcomes? The grandfather paradox is built on pure logic. A causes B, B causes C. But if C can change A, then the whole sequence becomes unstable. You're not just changing the future, you're changing the chain that created you. You're pulling the rug out from under your own feet. And it doesn't stop at killing your grandfather. Any action in the past that changes your own timeline leads here. Save a life that was meant to be lost. Destroy a letter that was never supposed to vanish. Say the wrong thing to the wrong person. Each change can ripple forward and erase the reason you were ever born, ever motivated, ever able to travel back in the first place. It becomes a paradox because it asks for both outcomes to be true at once. You exist and you don't. You kill your grandfather and you don't. Time becomes a reflection that can't decide which version of you is real. It's not that the event is complex, it's that it can't hold itself together. Think of it like a bridge that crumbles when you step on it, but you only stepped on it because the bridge was there. If it collapses, then you never walked it. But if you never walked it, it never collapsed. You're caught in a circle of cause and cancellation. This paradox also questions what it means to change the past. If the past can be changed, then it was never fixed. But if it was never fixed, then how did we ever build stable memories or consistent histories? And if the past is fixed, then time travel to the past must be impossible or entirely without influence, because any influence, any change, could unravel the very possibility of going back. The grandfather paradox does not rely on emotion or drama. Its power lies in logic. It exposes the limits of how we think about time, about action, about identity. We like to believe the past is solid, the present is moving, and the future is open. But what happens when we reach backward? When the present touches the past in a way that changes its own foundations? It also touches something deeper, the illusion of control. Time travel suggests mastery over time, the ability to undo, to edit, to fix. But this paradox reminds us that tampering with time is not like fixing a typo. It's like pulling a thread that unravels the whole tapestry, including the hand that pulled it. You don't need a machine to feel this. Think about decisions your ancestors made: a missed train, a last-minute change of heart, a glance across a room. What if that hadn't happened? Would you be here? Now imagine reaching back to change one of those tiny things. The paradox becomes real, not as a science problem, but as a feeling, a recognition that your existence depends on a fragile chain of events that you're not supposed to touch. So you step back into the time machine. You look at your grandfather, and the question hangs in the air. If I change this, do I erase myself? And if I do, who pulled the trigger? Who traveled back? Who made the choice? There is no clean answer. That's what makes it a paradox. It is not about solving the puzzle. It is about realizing that some puzzles break when you try to solve them. Time loops, identity collapses, cause and effect turn into smoke. The grandfather paradox is not here to warn you against time travel. It's here to show you that reality, once bent, may not return to its shape. It reveals a flaw in how we think about time. It turns the straight line of history into a spiral that never stops turning. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is Zeno's Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles can never overtake a slower tortoise in a race because he must first reach the point where the tortoise was, which will always be ahead. Achilles is fast, much faster than a tortoise. To be fair, the tortoise is given a small head start. A few meters ahead, the race begins. Achilles starts running. He quickly reaches the point where the tortoise began. But by the time he gets there, the tortoise has moved forward. So Achilles must now run to that new point. Again, by the time he reaches it, the tortoise has moved a little further. And again, and again. Every time Achilles gets to where the tortoise was, the tortoise has already moved somewhere else. So no matter how fast Achilles runs, he must keep reaching new points where the tortoise no longer is, which means, step by step, he never overtakes the tortoise. This is the paradox. A faster runner cannot catch a slower one, because between any 2 points, there are infinite smaller points. Achilles is always chasing a point that has just moved forward. No matter how small the gap becomes, there's always another gap left to cross. It sounds absurd. We know Achilles will overtake the tortoise. We can watch it happen. But the logic of the paradox says otherwise. It tells us that motion itself is impossible, because to reach any destination, you must first reach halfway. But to reach halfway, you must reach halfway of halfway, and so on, forever, infinite steps. And how can someone complete an infinite number of steps in a finite amount of time? This is not a riddle about speed. It's about division, the splitting of time and space into endless parts. Zeno, who created this paradox, wasn't trying to prove Achilles is slow. He was trying to show that our idea of motion breaks down when we apply strict logic to it. If space is infinitely divisible, then every movement becomes a chain of tasks that never ends. Suppose Achilles runs 10 meters to catch the tortoise. First, he runs 5 meters, then 2.5 meters, then 1.25, then smaller and smaller steps. Each step is half the distance of the last. But there's no final step. There's always another halfway point to cross. The distance shrinks, but never vanishes. He gets close, but never arrives. This seems to challenge what we know. We've seen runners pass each other. We experience motion every day. So how can a logical argument say it's impossible? That contradiction is the power of the paradox. It shows a flaw in our understanding, either of logic or of space, or of both. Maybe the problem isn't with motion. Maybe it's with how we think about infinity. An infinite number of steps doesn't always mean an infinite amount of time. The steps get shorter. The time to take each one also gets smaller. Perhaps all the steps together add up to a finite sum. But if that's true, then how can infinity be real? Can an infinite sequence truly end? Zeno's paradox traps us between two views. One is logical. Dividing motion into infinite tasks makes it impossible. The other is physical. Motion happens, whether logic approves or not. Both seem true, yet they disagree. Some say the solution lies in calculus, that mathematics can sum infinite series. Achilles' infinite steps form a geometric sequence. The total time can be calculated, and it turns out finite. Achilles does catch the tortoise. The paradox dissolves in equations. But does that really solve the paradox, or does it just shift the question? Calculus uses the idea of limits, how things behave as they approach something. But Zeno's paradox isn't about approaching. It's about reaching. It challenges the very act of crossing from not there to there, from behind to ahead. And what if we look deeper? What is motion really? Is it a continuous flow or a series of still moments stacked together? If it's continuous, then how do we measure it? If it's made of separate moments, then how does one moment connect to the next? Where is the point where motion becomes actual instead of possible? Zeno asks us to stare at something we take for granted, movement, and question its foundations. He doesn't deny motion happens. He questions how it happens. He builds a perfect logical trap that shows how our models can collapse under their own rules. It's not just about Achilles and a tortoise. It's about every journey, every change, every progression. If between any two moments there are infinite smaller ones, how does anything ever move forward? How does change happen at all? You pick up your hand. You think it's one motion. But Zeno says no. There were infinite steps in that lift, each one requiring the one before, each one smaller, never-ending. So did your hand ever really move? Or is it just a smooth illusion that hides an impossible chain? And that's what the paradox reveals. Not that the world doesn't work, but that the way we think about it might. It exposes the crack between experience and explanation, between what we see and what we can logically prove. We trust our senses. We see Achilles pass the tortoise, but Zeno whispers that reason disagrees, that logic, when stretched too far, folds back into absurdity. The paradox isn't wrong. It's complete. It follows perfect reasoning. And yet, it leads to an impossible result. So we're left in the middle, with motion that seems real and logic that says it shouldn't be. That's the strange place Zeno leaves us, not with confusion, but with awareness. Awareness that some truths live in the space between what is seen and what is reasoned. Achilles runs. The tortoise crawls. The finish line is out there. But in Zeno's world, they never meet. Not because of speed, not because of time, but because logic, when pushed to its edge, shows us that even the simplest things, like catching up, might not be so simple after all. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the liar paradox. This statement is false. If it's true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it's true. Just 7 words. But they tear a hole in logic. This statement is false. Read it once. It seems like a joke. Read it again. It begins to split in two. If the statement is telling the truth, then what it says must be correct. But what it says is that it's false. So if it's true, it's false. That's the first twist. But then, if the statement is false, then what it says is not correct. So it is not false, which means it must be true. That's the loop. True means false. False means true. The meaning flips endlessly, never settling on either side. This is not a language trick. It's a collapse of consistency. The paradox doesn't break because it's unclear. It breaks because it is too clear. It follows logic, and that logic leads to contradiction. The statement refers only to itself. No extra facts, no outside information. just a sentence pointing directly inward, and that self-reference is the trap. The sentence becomes a snake eating its own tail, never fully consumed, never fully whole. Try to label it. Let's say the statement is true. That's our starting point. We believe what it says. It says it's false. So then it is false. But wait, we just said it was true. So our assumption collapses. Okay, then let's try the other way. Let's say it's false. That means what it says is incorrect, but it says it's false. So that's not correct. It must be true. Which brings us back to the beginning. No matter where we start, we end up in the opposite place. And then back again, a seesaw with no end. This is the liar paradox. It's not a word puzzle. It's a contradiction trapped inside a sentence. It lives in logic, not grammar. It doesn't depend on emotion or opinion. It depends on structure, the structure of truth and falsehood, the way they are supposed to oppose each other. But here, they don't oppose, they fuse. And the more you think about it, the deeper the hole gets. Suppose someone says, "Everything I say is false." If that's true, then that statement is false. So some things they say must be true, but that contradicts their claim. On the other hand, if it's false that everything they say is false, then at least one thing they say is true. Could it be that sentence? If so, we're back in the loop. It becomes impossible to pin down what's true, because the act of claiming falsehood creates truth, and the act of claiming truth creates falsehood. This isn't just a clever line. It shakes the very idea of what truth means. We rely on language to describe facts. We assume that every sentence is either true or false, one or the other. But the liar paradox says, what if some statements can be neither? Or worse, what if they are both? That's a problem for logic. In classical logic, a statement can't be both true and false. That breaks the law of non-contradiction. A thing cannot be and not be at the same time in the same way. But the liar paradox sits exactly on that boundary. It defies classification. It exists in a limbo, where the categories of truth collapse under their own weight. You can't solve it by avoiding it. You can't declare the statement meaningless, because it does mean something. It follows all the rules of grammar. It's clear, simple, and perfectly understandable. That's what makes it dangerous. It's a clean sentence that explodes logic. Some try to escape it by changing the system. Introduce a third category, undefined, indeterminate, paradoxical. That way, statements like this don't have to be true or false. They're just something else. But then we have to rewrite how logic works. We have to allow for sentences that exist without a truth value. And once you do that, you've opened the door to uncertainty in every statement. How many other sentences hover between true and false? Or maybe we say that the statement refers to something outside itself, that it's not allowed to refer only to itself. But again, that's just rewriting the rules to avoid the paradox. We're not solving it. We're retreating from it. Because deep down, the problem is not the sentence. It's the assumption that every sentence must carry a stable truth. And this goes beyond language. The liar paradox is a mirror of self-reference. Any system that allows for self-reference risks collapse. It shows up in math, in logic, in computer science. Imagine a program that says, "This program will never stop," or "This program will stop if and only if it doesn't stop." The result is the same, a contradiction created by self-reference. The liar paradox is like a riddle with no outside context. It folds inward, it spins in place, it contains only itself, and yet that's enough to break everything. It doesn't tell a story, it doesn't describe a scene, it just is, and in that being, it becomes impossible. Try to silence it, ignore it, pretend the sentence doesn't matter, but the moment you hear it, it plants the contradiction in your mind, a statement that undoes itself, a truth that becomes false by being true, a falsehood that becomes true by being false, a sentence that doesn't ask to be believed, it demands to be doubted, and in doubting it, you believe it. This is the liar paradox, a perfect loop, a statement so small and so simple that it defeats the system it sits in. It is not a problem to solve. It is a problem that exists just to show that even logic has limits. Even truth, if twisted the right way, can turn on itself. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the paradox of value, diamond-water paradox. Water is essential, diamonds are not, yet diamonds cost more. You need water to live. Without it, the body breaks down. No water, no life. It cleans, it cools, it grows food. It falls from the sky, flows through rivers, sits in glasses. You drink it without thinking. It is everywhere. It is vital. Now hold a diamond. It sparkles, it shines, it cuts glass, sits on rings, symbolizes wealth, but you don't need it. It doesn't feed you, doesn't heal you, doesn't quench thirst. If every diamond disappeared tomorrow, your life would continue. Yet water, which gives life, is cheap, and diamonds, which do nothing essential, are expensive. Why? This is the paradox. Something that is necessary for survival is worth almost nothing in the market. Something that is completely unnecessary holds extreme value. Logic says the most important thing should cost the most, but reality does not follow that logic. This contradiction shakes our ideas of worth, of price, of what things are supposed to mean. It's not about luxury, it's about the gap between usefulness and value. Water keeps you alive. Diamonds sit in a box, but diamonds are rare. Water is not. That's what some say. Value is about scarcity. Water is everywhere, so its price drops. Diamonds are hard to find, so the price rises. But that answer doesn't settle the paradox. It shifts it. It tells us why the market works that way, but not why we accept that something less useful should be more valued just because it's rare. Imagine two people. One is lost in a desert. One is at a luxury store. The person in the desert would trade a room full of diamonds for one bottle of water. The person in the store would pay thousands for one small diamond. In one moment, water is priceless. In another, it's practically free. What changed? Not the water, not the diamond, only the context. So value bends, not around the object, but around the situation. This means value is not in the thing itself. It floats. It moves with need, with desire, with perception. But if value is always changing, always dependent, then how do we measure it? What does price really mean? The paradox shows us that value might not be a property of objects at all. It might just be an agreement we make without even knowing. The contradiction gets sharper. We say water has high use value and low exchange value. We say diamonds have low use value and high exchange value. But that creates a divide. It splits value in two. It admits we measure things differently depending on whether we need them or want them. But then how do we trust any measure at all? If value depends on what you're using it for, then it can never be stable. The same thing can be priceless or worthless depending on the frame you put it in. This isn't just economic confusion, it's philosophical tension. We think we know what matters. We think we can rank things. But the paradox says, not so fast. Your priorities might not match your behavior. Your choices might betray your beliefs. You say life is priceless. You say nature is sacred. But then you walk past a stream and buy a diamond. The paradox is not just in the market, it's in the mind. And it stretches into everything. A book can change your life, but it might cost $10. A designer bag might do nothing more than carry your phone, but it costs $1,000. A song might save someone's soul, but it's free to stream. A logo on a shoe raises its price, even if the materials are identical to a cheaper pair. So we start to ask, Is value about the object or the story we build around it? And if it's just a story, then is any value real, or are we trapped in illusions of worth, assigning greatness to things that glitter while ignoring the things that keep us breathing? The paradox also haunts decisions. A government spends millions protecting rare stones, while clean water runs dry in poor areas. The value system breaks under the weight of its own contradiction. It's not just that diamonds cost more, it's that we behave as if they matter more, as if needing something isn't enough, as if desire has more power than survival. And the question echoes louder. How do we define value? Is it emotional? Is it economic? Is it cultural? Or is it something else entirely, something we haven't understood yet? Maybe value isn't real. Maybe it's just a mirror. And the paradox is what happens when that mirror cracks. Even philosophers struggled with this. Adam Smith, who first framed this paradox, couldn't fully explain it. Later, economists tried. They said, marginal utility holds the answer. That value depends on the next unit, not the first. The first glass of water saves your life. The 10th is just refreshing. The 100th is useless. But every diamond is still rare, still wanted. So the value isn't in the object, it's in the change. But even that theory doesn't erase the strangeness. It only delays it. Why does one more bottle of water mean less than one more shiny stone? The paradox keeps circling. We buy what we don't need. We ignore what we can't live without. And then we try to explain it away with systems, with logic, with market rules. But the contradiction remains. It laughs quietly beneath the surface of every purchase. If the market were rational, water would be the most expensive thing on earth. But the market isn't about survival. It's about trade, about desire, about what one person will give to get what another person has. That's where the paradox lives, between want and need, between function and symbol. Water gives life, diamonds give status. One feeds the body, the other feeds the ego. And the paradox is that we often pay more for the second than the first. We value the symbol over the source, the sparkle over the substance. So you hold the glass, and you hold the gem. One is weightless, clear, flowing, invisible in its power. The other is dense, hard, visible, frozen in time. One disappears into your cells, the other sits on your hand. And yet, only one of them could keep you alive. Only one is absolutely necessary. But that's not the one people guard in vaults. That's the paradox, not just about diamonds and water, but about how we value everything, about how easily our sense of worth can be flipped, how fragile our priorities are when seen through the lens of logic. A paradox that doesn't need a twist. It just needs a price tag. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the twin paradox, relativity. One twin travels at near light speed and returns younger than the twin who stayed on Earth. Two twins, born at the same time, share the same age. One of them boards a spaceship and travels close to the speed of light. The other stays on Earth. Time ticks forward. The traveler returns after what feels like a few years. But the twin who stayed has aged much more. The one who stayed looks old. The one who flew is still young. Now they stand face to face, but they are no longer equal in time. They were once the same, but now one is older than the other. That is the paradox. If motion is relative, why is aging not? From the traveler's point of view, Earth was moving. It was Earth that rushed away and came back. So shouldn't the Earth twin be the one who aged less? Shouldn't the ship's twin see themselves as still, and the other as the one racing through time? If motion is relative, and both twins should see the other as the one in motion, then who is really moving? And who should really age? But one aged, the other didn't. So time didn't treat them the same. But time is supposed to be fair. Seconds should be seconds for both. Yet time bent for one and stayed straight for the other. not because of clocks, but because of motion. Time itself slowed down for the one who moved faster, but both can't be moving slower than the other. One has to be younger, and that means one has to have truly moved. But how can motion be both relative and real at the same time? The twin who stayed says, "You went out there, while I stayed still." The traveler replies, "No, you moved away from me." But only one comes back younger. That breaks the symmetry. The laws of physics say no frame of reference is special, yet the experience of time says otherwise. One twin becomes the exception. Time made a choice, but according to relativity, it wasn't supposed to. The paradox becomes sharper. If all motion is relative, then aging should be too. But aging leaves a mark. It's not a feeling. It's not a perspective. It's a body with more years, a face with more wrinkles, a clock with more ticks. Relativity says time stretches and compresses depending on speed. But if each twin sees the other as the one in motion, why don't both end up younger? Only one did. The paradox says, how can both be right, and yet only one show the result? Some say the difference is acceleration. The traveler turned around, changed direction, felt force. The earth twin didn't. That broke the symmetry. That made the traveler the real mover. But then, is motion only relative until you turn around? Is time only fair until you accelerate? Does a moment of force erase the idea that no frame of reference is special? And what about the moment they reunite? One has memories of a short trip. The other remembers decades. But the past was once shared. Now it's split. Two versions of time leading to the same present. Both correct, both real, both measured by perfect clocks. Time did not pass the same way for both, not because they saw it differently, but because it was different. That is the paradox. Time, which is supposed to be steady, turns elastic. It depends not just on speed, but on who feels change. One twin lived fewer years not by choice, but by motion, not by perspective, but by experience. Time shrank for one, but not the other. And this bending of time isn't fiction. It's measured. It's observed. Satellites account for it. Astronauts return slightly younger. The paradox is real, but still, it remains a contradiction, not in results, but in reasoning. How can both frames be valid, but only one frame show the effect? The traveler went far and came back. The earth twin stayed. Each thought the other was moving, yet one came back younger. Time split, but only in one direction. The symmetry of relativity collapses into asymmetry of age. Even more strange, if the traveler never returned, the paradox hides. No one compares clocks. Each lives in their own line of time. But reunion is what creates the contradiction. The act of coming back reveals the twist in time. Time's path is not just about where you are, it's about how you move. Straight lines in space become curves in time. So now, one twin holds memories of stars and silence. The other remembers growing old. They speak, but they do not share the same past. They were once equal, now separated by a force invisible but absolute. Time's distortion through motion. And the paradox asks, was one really younger, or did time just play a trick? But no trick can make clocks lie. The traveler's clock ran slower, not broken, just stretched. The paradox is not that we measured wrong, but that time itself changed shape. And so, the contradiction stays. If both perspectives were valid, why was the result not shared? If each could claim stillness, why did only one experience delay? If motion is always relative, why does the universe act as if one motion mattered more? This is the paradox, not a flaw in math, not a trick of language, a collision between symmetry and outcome, a loop that starts with logic and ends with imbalance, a race not between people, but between their own time. Two twins once stood side by side. One moved, one stayed. Now they meet again. But time has not treated them equally, not because someone made a mistake, but because time itself bends under speed. One path through the universe aged slower. One body escaped time's full weight, yet each still claims the same truth, that they were the one standing still. That's the paradox. Two truths, one outcome, time, divided. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the omnipotence paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that even it cannot lift? A being that can do anything, no limits, no exceptions, all-powerful. So then, can it make a rock so heavy that even it cannot lift? If it can create the rock, then there is something it cannot do. It cannot lift it. But if it cannot create such a rock, then there is something it cannot do. It cannot create it. Either way, there is a task that breaks the claim of being able to do all things. Power folds in on itself. Total power becomes the cause of its own limit. If the being creates the rock and cannot lift it, then its strength has a boundary. If it cannot create the rock, then its creativity has a ceiling. The power undoes itself whether it moves forward or backward. It is trapped by the very idea of being without limits. The paradox is not in the rock. It is in the logic of omnipotence. Can infinite strength include the strength to lose strength? Can perfect power include the power to make itself powerless? Suppose the being says, "Yes, I can make the rock," and "No, I cannot lift it." Then it admits to a limit. Suppose the being says, "No, I will not make the rock because I can lift anything." Then it avoids the task, but avoids by choice, not by inability. But if it chooses not to act, is that different from being unable? Refusing to create the rock does not erase the question. It only delays the contradiction. Even refusal becomes a twist. If the being chooses not to act to preserve its power, then it is limited by logic. But a truly omnipotent being should not be limited by logic. And yet, if it is not bound by logic, then nonsense becomes possible. Circles can be squares, truth can be false, but if nonsense is allowed, then meaning disappears. If omnipotence breaks reason, then omnipotence becomes unthinkable. The paradox doesn't just challenge power, it challenges thought. The rock is not a real object. It is a mirror. It reflects the contradiction of infinite ability turned against itself. The task is impossible, yet omnipotence means no task is impossible. So the question becomes, can impossibility exist within omnipotence? If not, then there is something outside power, logic itself. And if logic is outside power, then power is not absolute. But if logic is inside power, if power can bend even reason, then the paradox swallows itself. It no longer means anything. The rock is liftable and not. The being is limited and not. It becomes a world where contradiction lives comfortably. But if contradiction is real, then nothing can be trusted. Not questions, not answers, not meaning. The paradox wins by destroying the ground it stands on. Perhaps the problem is the question itself. Maybe the question makes no sense, like asking if a number is sad or if red is heavier than justice. But if omnipotence cannot answer meaningless questions, then it has a boundary. Not all-powerful, only powerful within reason. But if omnipotence only works inside reason, then reason becomes more powerful. Reason becomes the cage that even power must live in. Or maybe omnipotence is defined differently. Maybe it means the ability to do all possible things, not contradictions, not nonsense. But then we must admit, even omnipotence cannot make a square circle, cannot make 2 + 2 = 5, cannot make a rock that defeats itself. But then omnipotence is not truly all. It is only vast within reason. And if we say the being can create the rock and still lift it, then we have dodged the problem, because that would mean the rock is not truly unliftable. The question demands the rock be so heavy even the Creator cannot lift it. If that is possible, then the being is not all-powerful. If it is not possible, the being is still not all-powerful. The trap is tight. There is no escape in either direction. Some say true power includes the power to self-limit, to bind itself by choice. But if power can tie its own hands and cannot untie them, is it still power? Is choice a form of surrender? If omnipotence can reduce itself, then is it still omnipotence? And if it cannot reduce itself, is it already not omnipotent? Others say the paradox is like asking whether God can cease to be God. If the answer is yes, then divinity is unstable. If the answer is no, then divinity is restricted. The very act of being total makes certain things impossible. So either totality cancels itself, or totality includes the impossibility of stopping. And so the question keeps spinning. Can a limitless being be limited? Can all power include the power to end power? Can the highest strength contain within it the seed of defeat? The rock is not about weight. It is about contradiction. It is a test not of strength but of coherence, a sword made of logic aimed at the heart of infinity. The being is not lifting stone, it is lifting paradox. So what is left? If omnipotence cannot include contradiction, then it is bound by rules. If it can, then it swallows all meaning. The paradox does not weaken the idea of power. It exposes the tension in our ideas. We want omnipotence to mean everything, but everything includes impossibility, contradiction, nonsense. And once we include those, the word loses shape. The rock becomes a question that answers itself by refusing to be answered. It circles around truth and falsehood, pushing the boundaries of what can be asked. The paradox cannot be solved by strength, only stared at by reason. And in that stare, we see the limits of logic itself. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is Russell's paradox, a set that contains all sets that don't contain themselves. Does it contain itself? There is a set. This set includes every set that does not include itself. It is the set of all non-self-containing sets. Some sets include themselves, like the set of all abstract ideas, which may include itself since it is also an abstract idea. But some sets do not, like the set of all apples, which does not include itself because it is not an apple. Now we look at this special set, the one that includes only the sets that do not include themselves, and we ask, does this set include itself? If it does contain itself, then by definition, it should not, because it only contains those that do not contain themselves. So if it contains itself, it must not contain itself. But if it does not contain itself, then it qualifies to be included, because it only includes sets that do not contain themselves. So it must contain itself. But the moment it does, it violates its own rule again. It cannot contain itself without excluding itself, and it cannot exclude itself without including itself. That is the paradox, a loop with no fixed center, a self-definition that breaks itself by following itself, a contradiction formed by exact obedience to its own rule. The set is defined so precisely that its existence destroys the logic that defines it. We are not speaking in riddles. The question is sharp, mathematical, and direct. Does this set contain itself? A simple yes leads to a no. A simple no leads back to yes, like a pendulum with no rest, like a mirror reflecting itself into infinity, never settling into a single image. This is not a wordplay. It is a crack in the foundation of set theory. If we can form such a set, then set theory collapses under its own logic. The entire system becomes unstable because a system cannot allow a rule that breaks the rule maker. This set is not just a strange idea, It is the boundary where structure folds into paradox. Russell found this paradox when trying to understand how sets work in logic. Sets are supposed to be collections, clear and ordered. But this one is not a collection. It is a contradiction in the shape of a collection. It is the thing that undoes the very idea of what a set is supposed to be. Suppose we say the set exists. Then the question, does it contain itself, must be answerable. But no answer works. Every answer cancels itself. It is like saying, this statement is false with sets instead of words. It is the liar paradox in mathematical form, a loop with no end, no center, no grounding. Now suppose we say the set does not exist, but why not? Every part of its definition follows the rules. It is built using the same ideas as every other set. If it cannot exist, then something is wrong with the rules themselves. We must then say, not every collection we can describe is a valid set. But that breaks the dream of set theory, that any clear idea can be built into a set. The paradox says, not all ideas are safe. Some are sharp. Some will cut the hand that tries to hold them. If we try to fix it by saying sets cannot contain themselves, we run into new problems, because some sets do contain themselves, or at least it makes sense that they would. The set of all things describable by language contains itself. The set of all sets is supposed to contain every set, including itself. But now we must say, maybe there is no such set as the set of all sets. Maybe such a set leads straight into paradox, into collapse. Russell's paradox forces us to choose, either allow contradictions or restrict what we can define. But both choices cut deep. Allowing contradictions breaks reason. Restricting definitions breaks freedom. And whichever we choose, we are no longer standing on solid ground. Some tried to escape by creating a new system, a hierarchy of sets, a rule that says a set cannot contain itself, or that sets can only be made from things at a lower level. But even that fix feels artificial. A fence around the paradox, a warning sign, not a solution, because the paradox still exists. It just lives outside the fence now, watching silently. Others tried to say, maybe it is not a true set, but a class, something larger, less strict. But this only moves the problem, shifts the words. The paradox still pulses at the edge. It refuses to vanish. It keeps asking the same question. What happens when a system talks about itself? And that is the heart of it. Self-reference. The same danger that haunts the liar paradox, the barber paradox, the program that loops forever. The moment a thing includes itself in its own rules, the whole rulebook shakes. Consistency begins to warp. This is not just mathematics. It is the deep question of thought. Can any system fully describe itself without contradiction? Can logic explain all logic? Can reason define the limit of reason? Russell's paradox says no. It says the system will always break if it tries to hold its own reflection. The paradox is not a mistake. It is a message. It says, careful where you build your logic. Some structures collapse when they look at themselves. Some questions cannot be answered because the question itself undoes the answer. The set that contains all sets that do not contain themselves is both something and nothing. It is an idea that exists clearly in thought, but cannot stand in reality. It is visible and impossible at the same time. A concept that eats its own meaning. Ask again, does it contain itself? And the answer is yes, if no, and no, if yes, and nothing, if everything. The question never leaves. The paradox never resolves. It sits forever on the edge of understanding, repeating its quiet contradiction. That is Russell's paradox, a set that cannot be set, a rule that breaks by following itself, a truth that cannot exist because it is too perfectly defined, a circle that draws itself and disappears. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the bootstrap paradox. A time traveler gives Shakespeare a copy of Hamlet. Shakespeare publishes it. So who originally wrote Hamlet? The story folds in on itself. A time traveler visits the past and hands Shakespeare a copy of Hamlet. Shakespeare reads it. He publishes it. It becomes famous. Centuries later, that same copy ends up in the hands of a time traveler who carries it back again. The loop is closed. Hamlet exists, but no one wrote it. The traveler got it from Shakespeare. Shakespeare got it from the traveler. The words exist, but they have no origin, no beginning, no author. This is the paradox. A loop of creation without a source. A thing that exists because it exists. A story born from itself. The timeline holds Hamlet, but not its creation. The book moves through time, but never from a point of origin. It is not written, it is passed along, passed backward and forward in a perfect circle of causality that creates without creating. It is not about time machines, it is about authorship. If something is brought back in time and becomes its own origin, then where did it come from? Who composed the words? Who had the first idea? No one. Or everyone. The cause and the effect switch places until they become the same thing. The paradox swirls where logic tries to follow the trail and finds only loops. It feels impossible. Every effect must have a cause. Every book must have a writer. But in the bootstrap paradox, cause becomes effect and effect becomes cause. Each explains the other, but neither explains itself. The story cannot start because it is already finished. It cannot finish because it never began. It just exists, floating in time, untethered to any origin. We like to imagine timelines as straight lines, but the bootstrap paradox ties that line into a knot. It folds events into circles. It makes the future responsible for the past. It makes the past repeat the future. Identity, authorship, originality. These ideas dissolve inside the loop. Ask, who wrote Hamlet? The answer becomes both Shakespeare and the traveler. But if the traveler never wrote it, only delivered it, then the credit cannot go to them. And if Shakespeare never wrote it, only copied it, then the credit cannot go to him either. Yet Hamlet exists. It was printed. It was read. But the hand that first formed the lines is gone, or never existed, or existed only because it was always going to. Suppose you bring a violin back in time and hand it to a famous maker. They study it. They build copies. Their name becomes legendary. But who designed the violin? Not the maker. They copied it. Not you. You only carried it back. The design appears out of the loop, from nowhere. It is real, but its origin is imaginary, a gift from a timeline with no beginning. Now ask, is the violin truly invented? Is Hamlet truly written? If creation is a closed circle, does it still count as creation, or is it just repetition across time? If no one formed the first idea, then the idea has no ground. It exists, but without roots. It grows out of itself, and that is the paradox. The mind wants a first cause, a source, a spark, but the loop gives none. It says, here is the thing. It exists because it exists. The traveler gave it to the past. The past gave it to the future. The loop is complete. But logic is not. Even if we accept the loop, we cannot place blame or credit. The traveler is not the author. Shakespeare is not the author. But the words still came from somewhere. A loop cannot create meaning. It can only carry it. And yet, in the bootstrap paradox, meaning survives the loop. The words are there. The music plays. The invention works without ever being born. Try to untangle it. Try to find the first time the book existed. But there is no first time. Every time it appears, it is already there. There is no version of the universe where Hamlet is first imagined. No moment of ink on empty page. Only copies. Only loops. Only echoes. So what is more important, that Hamlet exists or that no one wrote it? Is existence enough, or does lack of origin make it hollow? If something has no beginning, can it still be meaningful? The paradox says yes and no. Now suppose you bring back technology, a blueprint for a machine, a cure, a mathematical formula. You give it to someone in the past. They build it, teach it, spread it. You learn it in the future and carry it back again. The loop continues. But again, who invented it? The formula is used. It works. It helps. But it came from a circle, not a mind. It appears as if it always existed. But always existed means it never began. The bootstrap paradox does not ask how time travel works. It asks what creation means when time travel breaks the line between before and after. It challenges the idea that all things must be caused, that all knowledge must be learned, that all stories must have a writer. What if the loop holds something new, something the world has never seen, but it was never imagined, only past? Does that count? Can the universe contain ideas that come from nowhere, yet still change everything? The paradox does not offer answers. It only bends the question until it folds back on itself. Time gives birth to something that time itself made, and in that twist, the logic falters. So who wrote Hamlet? Shakespeare, because he published it. The Traveler, because they delivered it. But neither, because neither created it. The paradox is the true author, a loop that writes without hands, a story with no storyteller, a masterpiece born from a question that cannot be resolved, and still the pages turn. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the Dichotomy Paradox. To reach a point, you must first reach halfway, then half of that, and so on forever. So how do you ever get there? To go from here to there, you must first go halfway, but before you get halfway, you must get to a quarter of the way, and before that, an eighth, before that, a 16th. The closer you get, the more divisions appear. The steps never run out. You divide again and again. Always more halves, always more space to cross. Each step is smaller, but the number of steps is infinite. You are chasing a point that stays fixed, while the path multiplies beneath your feet. The journey becomes a never-ending task of reaching pieces that never reach the whole. You begin to move. You reach halfway. Then you reach halfway of what's left, then halfway again. Every movement only completes a fraction, and no matter how small the next step is, there is always another step smaller still. The distance between you and your destination gets smaller, but it never becomes zero. The paradox is not in the finish line. The paradox is in the path. It says, you cannot get anywhere because there is always somewhere else to get to first, a place in between, a midpoint that splits the journey endlessly. The motion is broken into steps, and the steps multiply forever. So how can a finite journey require an infinite number of moves? You see the point ahead. You know people walk. You've seen feet reach doors, hands reach cups, runners reach ends. But the paradox asks you not to trust your eyes. It says, if each action has a step before it, and that step has another before it, then motion becomes a mirage. The illusion of progress hides the impossibility of completing infinite steps. You keep cutting the path into pieces. You reach halfway, then halfway again. 1 meter becomes a half, then a quarter, then a sliver, then a whisper of space. No matter how fast you move, the steps don't stop. You are always halfway to somewhere else. Time moves, space shrinks, but the count of steps grows forever. The paradox shows you a trap made of logic. You believe motion is possible, but motion requires finishing an infinite number of tasks, and an infinite number of tasks cannot be done in finite time. But then how do you move? You move. Yet reason says you shouldn't. So you stand at the starting point. You aim for the end, and the paradox says, between those 2 points, there is infinity, not of space, but of division. You are not crossing a path. You are crossing an endless ladder of smaller and smaller steps, a ladder with no bottom rung. And yet, people arrive. Arrows hit targets. Waves crash on shores. The world moves. But the paradox remains. It says, movement does not explain itself. The steps are too many. The count is too long. Your body may arrive, but your logic never does. Some try to escape the paradox by adding up the steps. Half plus a quarter plus an eighth, and so on. The total becomes one, a complete distance. The math works. The sum is finite. But the steps never end. The number of actions is still infinite. The path adds up, but the count keeps growing. The paradox shifts from space to time. If time must match steps, then how can time hold an infinite number of moments? Others say, maybe motion is continuous. Maybe there are no steps, only a smooth line. But if the line is smooth, why can we divide it endlessly? Why does every point open into two more? Why does infinity live inside every meter? The paradox is not about whether you move. It's about whether motion can be explained by breaking it into parts. If motion is real, but its parts are endless, then maybe motion is not made of parts. But if it is not made of parts, then how do we measure it? How do we track it, describe it, repeat it? And so the paradox pulls in two directions. Divide space, and you get infinity. Ignore division, and you lose clarity. The journey becomes a puzzle that cannot be solved without removing the pieces that make it. Suppose you cross a room, you go from one side to the other. You pass the midpoint, then half of what's left, then half of that. You arrive, but the paradox whispers, what if you never did? What if every step forward was just a smaller step inside a longer list? What if the finish line only arrived because you stopped counting? Motion works, but not because logic allows it. It works in practice, not in paradox. The paradox remains behind, reminding you that some explanations break when looked at too closely. That dividing space too many times makes it disappear. That splitting steps endlessly turns motion into stillness. The dichotomy paradox does not deny movement. It denies the simplicity of movement. It asks, how can something so ordinary hide something so infinite? It shows how something as simple as walking from A to B contains a secret that doesn't want to be solved. And still, you walk. The world moves. Distances vanish, but in every step, the paradox waits, dividing, halving, whispering, are you really there yet? Or is there always one more step to go? That is the paradox. You move, you arrive, but according to logic, you never should have. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the lottery paradox. You know one ticket will win. You also know that each individual ticket is very unlikely to win. So how can you believe any ticket will? The draw is set. One ticket will win. That is certain. It's part of the rules. The system guarantees it. Among thousands, maybe millions, one will be chosen. That is the truth. But then, look at each ticket. Ticket number 1, it will probably lose. Ticket number 2, very unlikely. Ticket number 3, still no reason to believe it will win. You go down the list, and each ticket, on its own, is almost certainly not the winner. The chance is so small, so tiny, that it seems safe to say, this one won't win, and the next won't either. You look at each ticket and rationally reject it. But now something strange happens. If you believe that about every single ticket, if you say none of them will win, then you believe that no ticket will win, but you also know that one will. That's the paradox. You believe something about each part, but the whole contradicts that belief. Every ticket seems like a loser, but all of them together must include a winner. You trust your reasoning on every piece. Yet that same reasoning fails when you zoom out. The parts say no. The whole